Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 69 of the Catching Up with Casey show. I'm super excited to have you guys here with us tonight if you're listening. And I'm even more excited to have you listen to my dear friend, Jana Lee from Jana Lee Consulting. Jana, how's it going?
It's going really well. It's going very excited to be here with you all tonight. So thank you for having me.
Perfect. And we have a really exciting topic tonight. And this is like two hot topics combined, right? So we're talking about data, which is a super hot topic, and we're talking about PLCs. I'm going to go ahead and just like state the elephant in the room that I say data, but I do know that there are people out there that say data. And I just think it's important for you to recognize that I could go back and forth between data and data this whole time. So
I kind of also will check to see the reactions of what people are, the facial. Are we going with data or data? Which one?
Yeah. What are we doing today? What are we doing?
Yeah.
So what do you want to go with? You want to try to go with one or the other? What do you say?
What do I say? I say, God, data? Data? Well, it depends. My New Jersey accent comes out and it's data. Don't even get me started. We'll save that for another time.
Sometimes I say it like back to back. I'll say data,
yeah.
tomato, whatever. So that's our first or one of our hot topics. And then we're meshing that with PLCs, aka professional learning communities. So, Jana, before we get started, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Cool. Yes. So Jana Lee Consulting. I specialize in helping school districts, charter schools, private schools, public schools, and any sort of school community looking for the experience and the expertise when it comes to data-driven instruction, best inclusion practices, MTSS, CST behavior, you name it. Really what supports students best, those instructional practices. And I started my teaching in the South Bronx of New York, where I was a special education teacher. I then moved into a founding leadership role at an all-girls school in the South Bronx, where I helped cultivate our special education department, our CST teams, our curriculum development. I was an instructional coach, and then moved into this beautiful realm where I'm so excited to be able to support more school districts, more school communities who can really benefit from using data in their classrooms to push inclusivity and student growth, both academically, behaviorally, social, and emotionally. So,
yeah. Okay. I love it. Well, I'm super excited about this topic. I think this is going to be one of those things that we have so much to say in such little time. But to start, I really want to state my, I guess it's a professional opinion, but I want to state it personally so that I'm not projecting it on anyone. But I find that we hear the terms, and I even heard it today in a planning meeting. Like, we hear the terms data all the time, but for whatever reason, it has a certain connotation for teachers and administrators. I think different people think of data in different ways, but for the most part, when people hear data, they associate it with things like benchmark assessments or state assessments. It's like they're looking for the percentages and the numbers and those kinds of things. Do you have a different perspective about data?
I think that data is all of those things and so much more. And
Mhm.
so when I'm first working with a community, we have to be on the same page in terms of the type of data that we are talking about. Are we talking about the data at the classroom level? Are we talking about data at the school level? And I've got a sort of assessment tiers visual that I'll share with clients in terms of getting on the same page collectively about the type of data that we want to see more of, and where perhaps we are spending most of our time analyzing current data pieces. And so what you've described, those percentages, whether it's F&P scores or math benchmarks, performance exams, those are the types of data where I find school leaders spend their most time uh, around, and they do so in silos in many ways, um, apart from teacher or teacher voice. And where I say that we need to spend more of our time is with the micro data. So the data collection that happens in the classroom with teachers so that we can immediately close learning gaps rather than waiting for formative assessments. And this may shock some of your audience. I'm not even talking about formative assessments when I talk about this micro data. I'm talking about what I call the check for understanding. And so honing in on that check for understanding to immediately close learning gaps instead of waiting for formative assessments or even classroom summatives to tell us where those learning gaps exist. And that's where we find teachers are sort of hamsters on a wheel, constantly playing this game of catch up, and where as leaders, we assume our teachers are using data. So we're going to look at those benchmark scores to make sure that it's happening. And we see gaps in the benchmarks. And what we don't then see is an emphasis on the micro data to close those gaps. So I think it really comes down to defining the data from a leadership perspective and a teacher perspective, and getting on the same page about what those data look-fors need to be, because they're going to differ dependent on how you define it.
Yeah. And we don't spend enough time really for any common term that we hear in education. We don't spend enough time in the beginning thinking about common definitions and thinking about those look fors, because we make those assumptions, and so often those assumptions are way off, or they differ so much from person to person what their perspective is of a certain definition or a certain term. So I would also add to that when you think you don't have enough time, prioritize your time to make time for those kinds of things that matter, especially in the long run. So, our title for this episode is Data Driven Inquiry in PLCs. How do you tell us more about data driven inquiry within professional learning communities?
Sure. So to build on the first step of getting on the same page in terms of how we define data, there is a way to bring in those data conversations in your PLCs where you will never have to ask the question again, what do I have my PLCs do this month? You will never have to ask that question again, because every PLC meeting can, in some way or another, include a piece of student where there's analyzing student work, collectively deciding what are next steps based on that student work. So it's not that your PLCs those topics need to change. And it's not even that the inquiry needs to change. What will make those PLCs so effective is that you will continuously bring in different pieces of student work that all relate around a centralized focus. So let's say, for example, that performance data reveals that students are unable to analyze their quotes in a paragraph. I'm pulling that out because that's what I hear a lot from. They just can't analyze, or they can't make inferences.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I feel you on that one.
Uh-huh.
So what are we doing? All right, well, let's use our PLCs to push the inference making in our students, with our students, I should say. And so what everybody from the PLC team is going to do is bring a piece of student work where students were asked to make inferences and in their writing. And collectively, we're going to engage in student inquiry where, and there's analysis and protocols for this. I have some of this up on my website. But collectively, teachers are deciding what are some common patterns that we are seeing in this work and what are our next steps going to be to collectively support the inferencing of students, the inferencing of evidence. Inferencing is not just an ELA thing. It's a social studies, it's in math, it's in reading. Yes, it's in writing, but that's a cross-disciplinary strategy that students need. They need to be able to do. And so that PLC is going to go back to their classrooms and they're going to engage in the practices that they just decided upon in the PLCs. And they're going to bring data to support the check for understanding and maybe a formative assessment to support student growth in their inferencing skills. And so you create a cycle of alignment where the application of data-driven instruction happens within PLCs. That's where the rubber meets the road. So the act of collecting data happens in the classroom, but applying that data, yeah, it also happens with the check for understanding framework. It also happens in the classroom, but over time, the progression of seeing how those strategies are closing gaps, you analyze that student work and use that data in your PLC.
Yeah. Man. Okay. So I'm just the whole time you're talking about this, because I'm such a visionary. I visualize all kinds of things and envision things. I'm imagining what this looks like happening with groups of teachers, and it gives me chills thinking about it because it could be so impactful, but I don't think we see it happening very often.
I was with a school on Friday, and I had an administrator say to me, we use PLCs like book clubs. I get that. I'm not saying that that's not a way. There's a way, right?
Yeah.
But this is also an administrator who wants to move towards like really pushing the data collection piece and responsive teaching and targeted instruction. So we are actually moving toward using PLCs as the vessel by which teachers can talk about data-driven instruction. So there's sort of 3 steps. If you're a leader out there, or an instructional leader of some sort, and you're like, okay, so like, how would we even begin something like this? Let me give you 3 like concrete ways. These are 3 ways that I first start with when I'm, or I'll share with a team that I'm first beginning with. So as a leader, you first have to know your teacher's competency and confidence in their understanding of data. You have to know where they stand, you have to know where they think they stand. Okay. I've got a PLC Insight tool that we'll share at the end where our leaders will bring that tool to their teachers and use that survey as a means for understanding where their teachers land in terms of their own competency and confidence around data. So that's number 1. Number 2, you're then going to analyze those results with your administration team. You're not going to do it by yourself. And you're going to share with your PLCs that analysis. So you'll share, like, this is where we stand in terms of our competency and our confidence. That tool that I mentioned, Casey, comes with a video that speaks to exactly how to do that. So that's number 2. Then number 3, this is the most fun thing, I think. You're going to develop indicators as a team of what targeted instruction and responsive classrooms look like in how we use data to drive decisions. So the indicators are not just about using data. We use the data in our classrooms to create a responsive and targeted instructional approaches to immediately close learning gaps, right? So we need to collectively create indicators, look for success criteria, whatever you want to call it, in terms of what that looks like. And from there, that's where the magic happens. Informal walkthroughs, those 10, 15, 20-minute snapshots where leaders are walking into classrooms, you're using those look-fors.
Yeah.
So it's not just a game of like growth in whatever we see. You're now super focused and succinct in what you're looking for in those informal walkthroughs. Your debriefs grounded in the language of those indicators. Everyone begins to develop a common understanding. As a leader, you are now not just analyzing teacher observations, right? Of course, you're going to do that, but you're also going to analyze what is my walkthrough data telling me in terms of our progress and growth in responsive teaching.
Yeah.
That's what I call the use of data in classrooms. It's to create a responsive classroom.
Man.
And so those are the first few, the jumping off points.
Okay, so I'm going to recap those and show them again. No teacher's competency in understanding data and their confidence in it, which I think is so powerful. Can you speak just a little bit more about the importance of their confidence in understanding data?
Sure. I mean, it goes back to what you had mentioned earlier about like data being this like don't want to, no way, no how, right? And one of the first things when I'm working with a teacher is we've got to bring the wall down in terms of how we view data. It doesn't have to be a big lift. It won't be more work. It won't be more planning. It's a matter of like trusting the process and taking risks in it's almost like your teachers, we want to get teachers to identify or name the data point in their lesson. So it's as simple as taking a question that they might ask to the whole group and decide this is the question that I'm going to use to measure how my students are progressing towards meeting the learning goal of the lesson. So it's just shifting. And that goes along with building teacher confidence. We've got to break the narrative around what it means to be a data-driven classroom.
Yeah. And that's something too, I think, that we hear so often. And then the meaning behind data-driven instruction gets really misconstrued. And I think that's definitely where a breakdown in confidence can happen for sure. Okay. And then the second was analyze the results that you gain with the administration team and share this with teacher teams, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, listen, this is where we are showing that we think of data in terms of just formative assessment, right? Or the majority of us don't think that we're using data the most productively, right? Like, what is that information telling you? Because that will help you figure out as a leader, what are my next steps in terms of like where I need to cultivate most of my time and energy in best supporting my students, best supporting my teachers around this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third, develop indicators and I love this, develop indicators as a team of what targeted instruction looks like. And here's why I love this so incredibly much. We talk about how plates are full and how plates are full for not only teachers, but also leaders, right? Well, this eliminates some of the stuff that we feel like we have on our plate because you can get super clear and focused on one concept, one type of targeted instruction. What is it going to look like and how are we going to analyze that in the data? Man, it alleviates so much pressure to try to address so many different things all at one time.
Exactly. And you're doing it with your teachers. So there's also buy-in, motivation. There's no surprises. It's not let me catch you, right? It
Right.
alleviates the pressure of the leader. It puts onus on teachers to take some of the responsibility, and teachers crave leadership opportunities. I refuse to believe that listen, okay, maybe there are some who don't want this, but many of the teachers I work with love the opportunity to be part of the change, to be part of
Mhm.
the school decisions, and this is a way to build that.
Yeah. Yeah, people want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves, something that they can belong to.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about the challenges that happen when a team might decide or an administrator might decide they want to move in this direction. What are some challenges you think people might face in this transition?
Sure. Teacher buy-in.
Mm,
You have to define what you're talking about with your teachers so that the resistance kind of, fades away over time. Once it
right.
clicks for teachers, you're going to be you're just going to feel a breath of, you're going to have a breath of fresh air, but teacher buy-in, absolutely. Um Another challenge is, teachers want to see what this looks like.
Mhm.
And part of my goal when I'm working with a community is in ensuring that I'm focusing not so much on reaching a ton of teachers at once, but that I'm really focusing on a small number of teachers at first to build quality around this so that they eventually move into their classrooms and can begin to build some demonstration classrooms.
Mm,
So I have a district where I've been working on their co-teaching practices, and we got data assessment really big part of that, like really at the core of their instructional decisions, especially with two teachers in the room. And we have finally moved to a point where they've opened up their classroom as a sort of a demo room for other teachers to come in and see what this looks like. So as a leader, um, that has to be part of what you prioritize.
mhm.
Focus on a small group of teachers who perhaps are ready to buy into this, who are, maybe want to explore leadership roles in some sense and need to nail this component down. Focus on a small group of teachers and open a work toward opening an in-house demo classroom where
Mm,
others can see this in action.
yeah. Yeah. Have you seen that happening? Like, have you tried that with some schools or seen it happening in some schools where it worked effectively?
Oh yeah, we just record I recorded a lesson with two teachers, and I'm now using that lesson, that recording in my coaching sessions with
Mhm.
teachers as a debrief.
Yeah.
And I swear to you, I had several teachers be like, "Oh, that's what it looks like." Oh, I even had one teacher, she was it was great. She was like, "We could do that." Like, there's, like, some, like, healthy competition going on because 'cause they're like,
Yeah.
"Wait, if they're doing that, we could do that." So, teachers need to see it, and as a leader, you have to prioritize that. You can bring that recording, right, or a great practice into your PLCs as the kickoff, as a not as the kickoff, but as part of your analysis.
Yeah.
Student inquiry, but also teacher inquiry. Right?
Mhm.
All around the push forward for closing learning gaps and supporting teachers' use of data to do so.
Yeah. You've talked a little bit about just that resistance piece, which is probably the main barrier,
Mhm.
but I think we could go probe a little bit further and say it's maybe the barrier is that leaders don't know how to handle that resistance or approach it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I could see just from what I've experienced before, even myself as a classroom teacher, going to a meeting where I've been asked to bring student data,
Mhm.
when a leader says that blanket statement, like bring student data, number one, my thoughts are like, well, what do they mean by student data? Should I bring this? Should I bring this? Well, what if so and so brings this? What if so and so's data is better than my data? So
Mhm.
there's automatically questions about like, what the heck do I bring to this? And is it going to be good? Like, we have that thought in our minds. Is it going to be good enough? Or what is this going to showcase about me as a teacher? I think that is definitely a fear that teachers might have in beginning this process and bringing student data together. So how do you suggest that leaders help teachers to, number one, understand, be okay, like try to release some of that fear, know what student data they're talking about, what they're looking for? Because I could definitely see that as just like a roadblock in starting this.
So here's my answer to that. Instructional leaders have to be part of that inquiry and of the PLC. They have to be a team member. They have to sit alongside their teachers. They have to get on the ground and do the work alongside them. That's number one. Number two, take an I do, we do, you do approach. So I do, right? Let me show you what this could look like as a leader in this, and take all of that anxiety, stress, and questions out on me with this piece of student work that I'm bringing. Okay. Now you might have folks saying, well, what student work? I grab something that make it anonymous, like ask your teachers to submit if they want to, submit something anonymously, and you pull one, right? Or you look at them and you say, which one is like the worst in here in this bunch? And let me pull that anonymously as the one that we focus on. So it's almost like let me as a leader, take the reins, and also like put it all on me to begin with.
Yeah.
Then we do. And at this point, you can give some teachers choice. Hey, listen, let's do another one collectively. Or if you feel comfortable, let's take out that work that you brought with you, and we can do it at the same time, but each work on our own, submit our own pieces to the, work on them as a team, but using our own student work.
Yeah.
A lot of choice, and you have to be okay giving teachers that choice. We cannot force teachers to do anything. There's a researcher, I love him. His name is Michael Fullen, and he's really big on developing cohesive systems, at the teacher, parent, leadership level. And he calls leaders, he says instructional leaders must be lead learners who are advocating for right drivers, meaning we have to, as leaders, we must be alongside our teachers, learning throughout the process and identifying the correct drivers for change that are going to create the results that we want to see. And so part of that process for teacher buy-in is leadership getting on the floor, doing the work with them, and then debriefing within that same meeting. The third thing I'd say is debriefing at the end and saying what worked here, what didn't, and what questions do you have? What didn't we like about this?
Yeah.
We have to have those conversations. Like, what did you not like? What worked? What are we willing to try next time? Baby steps. What are we willing to try next time to move that needle?
I love that question. What are we willing to try next time? And I think it's so important too that leaders recap, like, here is the purpose, here is our vision, this is why we are doing this, so that when you ask the question, what are we willing to try next time, we know we're all looking toward forward movement.
All I say to my teachers is, are you willing to take a risk? And if so, how far do you want to push it? We could take the slowest movement forward in terms of the needle, or you might say, I'm not there yet. So we'll pivot and we'll do something else. But the choice, it has to come from the teacher. That's the only way that meaningful and sustainable change will occur.
Yeah. Yeah. So can I talk to you real quick about the types of, I know I'm going like, I have these preset questions, guys.
Everywhere and anywhere, wherever we want to, where are we going?
Sometimes I read them and sometimes I'm like, I don't want to ask that question. I want to ask my own question. Another question that I'm thinking of now. So tell our audience a little bit about the different types of student work and data that you've seen teachers work around in PLCs.
I've seen everything from literally a homework assignment where students had to go home and complete 3 math problems to a full-blown essay in, 3 or 4 page essay in a high school, writing ELA class around
Mhm.
Shakespeare. I've seen other elementary PLCs. They're not bringing the ones I've worked with around this. They're not bringing FMP scores to the table. They're bringing their writers' notebooks, and not even the whole notebook, or readers' notebooks, not even the whole notebook. One thing from the notebook that,
Mhm.
that focuses on characterization. It's small, but it ties to the focus. So
Yeah.
as a PLC team, it's like there's all these different pieces. We see gaps in student learning, and we've got all this data that shows us the gap. So what we do is we use PLCs as the vessel to hone in on closing those gaps that we're seeing from the top, those top performance scores, and we're going to use data to do that. We're going to use data to close the gap.
Mhm.
So as a team, you get to decide what's the gap. And this goes back to using a protocol, data-driven inquiry protocol. What's the gap that we're noticing? What do we want to focus on? We're going to focus on it for 4 to 6. Some teams do 6 to 8, depending on how how deep of a dive they really need to close the gap.
Mhm.
Especially around inferencing. I see some teams spending close to 2.5 months in their PLCs around it. And we're going to go in a rotating cycle where we're going to focus on pulling textual evidence, and then we're going to focus on inferencing, and we're going to focus on prediction and characterization and identifying theme, and so all of that gets pulled on the higher data, and we use PLCs to focus on micro data to close the gaps. Does that make sense? Sometimes
Yeah.
I feel like I am like, and none of it is making sense.
Like do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
Exactly. And then I'm like, tell me, did any of that resonate? Yeah.
No, yeah, it did. It's funny because I was thinking over here, oh my gosh, I don't even have anything to respond with because I'm just all smiles, like, that sounds great. Because it really does, it's like I don't have anything to respond with, just yes, and a big smile. So when people are listening to this in the podcast later and they can't see our faces, just know
Yeah, no.
that Casey was like a huge cheese face grin going on in my face listening. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to ask another question that I didn't plan on asking.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit, just like a little taste of micro data.
It is the ability of a teacher to name what it is they're looking for in student work, and then doing something about it for students who didn't get it. That is
In the
it.
moment.
In the moment, like literally immediately. And that's what I say to teachers, and they're like, oh, it's literally like, what are you looking for? And what are you going to do about it right then and there?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, all of this that we're talking about, we're going to close here in just a few minutes, but all of this that we're talking about, it makes me think about how intentional you can be in PLCs, but what the trickle effect of that is when teachers go back to their classrooms, and how influential it is in the planning process, right? And I know, and you and I, like, we've got this whole side conversation about boxed curriculums and everything, and Alyssa's been trying to come up with some different analogies,
Yep.
and they're great. This is what we're talking about tonight, is such a crucial topic, even when you carry or take on this boxed curriculum and want teachers to teach it with fidelity, because they still have to pave the way for learners in their classroom, these human beings who do not come to us boxed, right?
Yeah.
So even this helps our teachers to be able to plan effectively, even when they have a mandated or scripted curriculum.
And I work inside that curriculum with teachers to identify where the check for understanding is. And I'll say this, Casey, everything a teacher needs to do this is in their curriculum. I don't care what curriculum it is. I don't care if it's IM, if it's foundations, if it's, geodes or, any other math, like whatever it is that you're using, there is a check for understanding, that what, and what am I going to do about it right then and there. And
Yep.
so the teacher has to be trained by the leader to identify those moments. And so there's a lot of front loading that happens in the beginning to get teachers to recognize what that looks like and how to plan for that within the lesson. It's never about creating more within the lesson. It comes down to rearranging some things that's in the lesson, so that immediate targeted response can occur.
Yeah.
And once teachers grasp onto that, it's game on. It's game on. But, I remind teachers that you are in charge at the end of the day. This curriculum is here to support you, but you get to make those decisions. And so leaders one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give is that a leader has to make it okay and has to communicate that it is okay to move outside or shift things around in a boxed curriculum. They have to provide that okay.
Yeah.
To their teachers. And teachers will feel like, okay, then let me start to shift some things around.
Yeah. So good. So good. Okay. This whole show is really about building cohesive, vision driven teams.
Yep.
Tell how what we've talked about tonight adheres to the idea of or helps to build cohesive, vision driven teams.
Everyone will begin to develop shared expectations and accountability for closing learning gaps for students, because they're getting it in PLCs, they're getting it in informal walkthroughs, they're hearing it from their leaders, they're seeing it in their students' work. So that concept of using data to drive gaps is happening everywhere. And teachers will hold themselves accountable, but they'll also start to hold each other accountable. Hey,
Yeah.
where's that student work? You better, run back to the classroom and go and bring it in. And there will be that. And that is cohesion from the inside out. And that's why I emphasize the micro data within the classroom, the inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me tonight.
Much.
I think we could just go on. Like I said, this is a topic that we should have had like part 1.
I know.
We can come back to part 2 another time. It's fine. I'm good with that.
If anybody has any questions, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of those things, and grab my PLC tool, Insight Survey tool. Email me, connect with me, DM, whatever you need. I'd be more than happy to engage in conversation with leaders who want to take that jump and, support their teachers in this way.
Yeah. So with that said, all that you need to know about Jana is going to be in the show notes of YouTube, LinkedIn, and the podcast. If you find this podcast episode on any podcast platform that you choose to use, you'll see this in the show notes, but you can find Jana at janaleeconsulting.com. Is that correct?
Yep. Instagram at jana.c.lee. I just, sometimes I mix up my Instagram and my Twitter. My Twitter at Jana_C_Lee. And then LinkedIn, just type in Jana Lee. There's not many of us. You'll find me on there.
And you can grab the PDF that she's been talking about at jana-lee.mykajabi.com/opt-in. And that also will be in the show notes.
It's on my website. It's on my, you can ask for it on any of my socials. I will email me. I can get it right to you.
Perfect. Sounds awesome. Okay, guys, we're so appreciative of you for joining us tonight, and we will catch you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Hey there. Thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with KC on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.